Thank you for coming out, sharing your afternoon with us. We'll talk a little bit about, well, we'll talk a lot about the disparity study today. We'll dig a little deeper into the data. I'm giving you an opportunity to really glean the findings of the disparity study, but more importantly, the recommendations and some of the next steps that we have coming forward. So without further ado, what I'd like to do is invite up our co-host, Nana Watson, from the local chapter of the NAACP. She'll give some welcome remarks, followed by Mira Ginther, and then our consultant, Mason Tillman, whom you all really came to hear from today to hear more about the disparity study. So Nana.
You know, the NAACP has been engaged in the conversation about the disparity study since 2017. It's been a journey. The report validates what the community has known. Black and women have not received their fair share of the economic pie. Mayor, thank you for your commitment to diversity as it relates to minorities and women, and I applaud you for that. Director Brown, thank you for all that you've done to take us on this journey. You've been a force in this disparity study. We are now ready for phase 2. We must be patient because this challenge did not occur overnight, and we need to have it correct. So we need to be patient and begin to have community conversations about it. So I thank you for your attention, and I'm so happy to be a partner with the City of Columbus, the NAACP is. Am I to introduce the mayor? I now would like to introduce the mayor, the great City of Columbus, who embraces diversity and inclusion.
Thank you. Thank you, Nana, and thank you all for being here today. Very excited about the conversation and the report out. Many of you have been engaged in this process all along the way, and so excited to have Mason Tillman, Dr. Ramsey, who is known throughout the nation for her incredible work and the work of the firm in cities and states all over the country, to Nana and to Director Brown and the entire team at Diversity and Inclusion. I want to thank you for your leadership in getting us to this point. When I took office almost 4 years ago, I challenged my directors to place a high standard on the role of diversity and inclusion at the city, pushing for stronger recruitment strategies and tasking leadership to champion the value of diversity. At the same time, I called for a disparity study for the city, the first one in the city since 1993. I graduated from high school in 1993, and I'm not any spring chicken, so it was long overdue. We knew that to make real and sustainable policy changes in the future, we needed to look at where we'd been in the past. Last month, we received the study. Mason Tillman found that there were disparities for African American businesses, Asian American businesses, and Native American businesses in prime contracts. The study also reported an underutilization of women-owned businesses on contracts over $100,000. The study also showed disparities for African American, Asian American, and women-owned businesses for subcontracts as well. In addition to the study findings, Mason Tillman also provided recommendations for us moving forward to level the playing field for all businesses. Today, we're asking for your feedback from the community. We had a session this morning and with you this afternoon on how to incorporate this study into our plans for moving forward. To be clear, our departments have already started some important changes since the end of the data period Mason Tillman reviewed. So just earlier this year, we shared with the community a utilization report that shows some of our initial successes. In 2017, we saw a 50% increase in city spending with minority and women-owned businesses. In 2018, we saw another 24% increase over 2017. 15.58% of our contracts last year were awarded to minority and women-owned businesses. So over the last 4 years, going from 8 to 12 to nearly 16%. Good progress, but as you know better, in the city of Columbus is not good enough. We've had successes as one of the largest employers in the city in recruiting and hiring workers that reflect the beautiful diversity of this city. If you've been with me the last 2 police and fire classes, the highest scoring classes in the city's history, the most diverse as well. So initial progress that's being made, and I'm proud of the work of all of my directors, working with Director Brown and her team to look at everything we do through an inclusion lens. This is just the start. Now we have an analysis of how we can improve from a policy standpoint, and I'm very excited about being able to move forward. We are striving to realize the vision of Columbus being America's opportunity city, but we know we can't realize that vision unless we first become America's equal opportunity city. Thank you all for being here, and it's now my pleasure to introduce our great partner in this work, someone that's known for her work, years of experience in research and analysis, working with cities and states around the country. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Ramsey from Mason Tillman to dive a little deeper into what their analysis found. Dr. Ramsey?
Good afternoon, everyone. This is probably one of the largest audiences to which I have presented a disparity study finding, which also indicates, Mayor and Ms. Brown, there's great interest in the next stage, and we are but setting the platform for which you can launch a much more progressive program. And so pleased to be here and recognize that those of you who are business owners, you're missing an opportunity to make another 5 cents, maybe 10 if you're lucky. So I don't want to keep you beyond the time that we're committed, but want to use this opportunity to share with you the results of the study, and also to thank you for allowing us to be part of this process. And it is for us, having been in the business of doing this work now since 1990, to have a client that really wants to know what they have been doing and to want a roadmap to improve and enhance what they are doing. And so for me, it's a great pleasure to be part of this discussion. And just by way of introductions, you should know that we have been doing this work for a long time. We've done it in a lot of communities, and we've done it in large cities, medium-sized cities, small cities, and we started our work quite early in Gotham City, New York, so we understand the most complex of city government. But most important is certainly uniformity across the way city governments do their work, and we bring that knowledge to you. We also had the good fortune of being selected by 2 local consultants to be their prime contractor, and so we've been working with both Blazing the Way and Supplier Diversity Research in the process of conducting this study. So disparity study has a purpose, and to understand the purpose, you have to understand the law that underpins the requirement and the process. And Don O'Bannon, who is our legal advisor and who has enabled us to produce studies that have the appropriate legal foundation and have been studies that meet all of the legal requirements. He is going to give you a lesson in what it means to do a disparity study and what the court requires for such an endeavor.
Yeah. All right. God, come on. All right. All right, good. I know it's after lunch and you guys are kind of maybe settling down a little bit, but let me talk to you about the most exciting area of the law, and that is the disparity law. First of all, before I talk about Croson, I want to explain the change that Croson made in the legal landscape. Prior to Croson, a governmental entity could use race and gender as long as there was a rational basis for that decision. So if you had, it was called a rational basis test. So as long as the government interests, you know, we want to promote local development, we want to promote the development of small businesses, as long as it had some rational basis, the Supreme Court would allow, if constitutionally challenged, the use of race and gender to be utilized in the public contracting forum. But that changed dramatically when the decision of Richmond v. Croson came out. Richmond v. Croson, decided in 1989, changed that legal standard from a rational basis test to strict scrutiny. For those of you who have flirted with the law, you would know that strict scrutiny, the law was basically, in the profession, strict in scrutiny, fatal in fact. And what that meant was that the Supreme Court, once challenged or once it determined a strict scrutiny standard, there was no way that any governmental action would survive that type of constitutional challenge. So it was deemed by the civil rights community as a major setback by having the Supreme Court change that standard from rational basis to strict scrutiny. So that's the backdrop on this. But what has happened is that the disparity study industry has found ways to make this test work and to be able to withstand a strict scrutiny standard and provide, under the law, a strong basis in evidence for a decision in public contracting that uses either race or gender. Now, let me footnote, gender is under a different standard. I normally want to say that only to indicate that we understand the law, and we know that the case of Richmond was an MBE program case, not a WBE case, and that the courts have adopted a lesser standards for WBEs, and that standard is intermediate scrutiny. But we analyze all of our work under this strict scrutiny approach. We use the strict scrutiny test as we do our work, because if we can do it under strict scrutiny, we know we don't have to worry about an intermediate scrutiny attack, all right? So what happens is in 1989, the Supreme Court changes the standard. They adopt this test of compelling interest, narrowly tailored, and updated periodically. In the interim, there was a challenge to the federal program. And in a decision called Adirondack versus Pena, this strict scrutiny standard began to be applied to federal contract dollars as well as state and local contract dollars. So you now have a uniform standard of review for any type of governmental action, state, local, or federal, in which it is analyzed using this test, and that is the strict scrutiny test. So what is the strict scrutiny test? One, you have to have a compelling interest. And what does that mean? In practical terms, that means you have to have a strong basis in evidence for any decision in which race or gender is utilized. A strong basis in evidence. What is a strong basis in evidence, you ask? Well, I'll tell you. A strong basis in evidence is that you have a significant statistical disparity between availability and utilization. Let me repeat that one more time, like you're in church, right? All right. A significant statistical disparity between availability. What's availability? Availability is the presence of firms in the marketplace that do that particular work, and utilization. Utilization is who is receiving the dollars, in this case, from the city of Columbus. So as long as you have that significant disparity, you pass the first component, which is the compelling interest test. Narrowly tailored is the second prong of this test. Narrowly tailored means this: everybody is not going to be included in the remedy. If you are not an injured party, you are not entitled to the remedy. We've been around these programs for a long time. And I know that in many jurisdictions who've had what I call legacy programs, the Supreme Court wants at one time for these types of programs to come to an end. So what they said in Richmond was that and subsequent decisions have refined it, is that if you are not subject to a statistically significant disparity, you can't be in the program. So, North Carolina DOT challenge in the Fourth Circuit. Fourth Circuit gets the opinion. One of the beneficiaries that's named in the revised state North Carolina program is women. They look at the statistics. Women are overutilized according to the data. Fourth Circuit says they can't be included in the program. You have to have a remedy. In City of Richmond must have copied someone's form because Eskimos were included in the group of protected class. The Supreme Court said, no, no, no. I don't know how many Eskimos doing business in the City of Richmond, but unless you have some evidence to show that they're being discriminated against, your program is over-inclusive and therefore constitutionally invalid. So, strong basis in evidence gives you a compelling interest, have to be narrowly tailored, and then the last component in this series is that you have to update it periodically. Okay, thank you. You have to update it periodically. And what does that mean? That means what happened 20 years ago, you can't rest on that for a decision now. So if in 2000 you had statistically significant disparities, and now it is 2019, you cannot continue to rely upon that 2000 study because the circumstances may have changed. The dynamics may have changed. Even the building programs where the city spends its money might have changed. So you have to have current evidence that there is still a continuing need for the program, that there is active, ongoing discrimination now that you can put your finger on that would support a continuation of these race and gender conscious measures. So what are the objectives of a study? They are determine if there is a statistically significant underutilization between availability, determine the priorities, ascertain the practices. Oh, I got to put my glasses on. I can't see as big as that is. That is so embarrassing. I mean, it's like I'm getting old, people. Here we go. Wait a minute. Whoo, Lord, much better. Okay, ascertain practices affecting any documented disparity. And what that means is, what is the cause of these disparities if they are there? In the words of Justice O'Connor in Richmond, City of Richmond, she said the anecdotal evidence brings the statistics to life. They explain what is going on and why your numbers are where they are. So that anecdotal evidence gives you insight into what are the practices that are resulting in documented disparities. Assess the effectiveness of your race and gender neutral programs. Outreach is gender neutral. Advertising is gender neutral. Look at all of those to see what impact, if any, they are having upon your particular contracting community and how the work is processed. Provide detailed program recommendations, and this study has detailed program recommendations for your consideration. I will do a disclaimer. We make the recommendations. It is up to your team to take those recommendations and craft them as they see fit to work within your particular environment. And then it says prepare a report with narrowly tailored remedies. we briefly talked about narrowly tailored, but you need your goals to be based upon your current availability of race and gender in specific industry categories. We do architecture and engineering, we do professional services, we do goods and services, we do construction, and the analysis is focused on each of those different industry categories, all right? Both at the prime level and at the subcontracting level. Also, it is broken down by ethnicity and gender, and you have African American male, African American female, as well as just straight African American. So we've broken that analysis down for you. And then you come up with your goals based upon the defined availability. So this gives you the full role of how this study is going to be utilized. Now, I think that's the last slide. Please keep in mind, we always recommend contract-specific goals. And contract-specific goals require an individual analysis of the construction opportunities, subcontracting opportunities available on a particular contract. And they will vary by project. You may have a building project on a green site, and it requires all types of different subcontracting categories. You may have a road repaving project, which requires an entirely different set of skill sets. And each of those has to be evaluated in terms of goals. And I ask you to have some sophistication that you just don't slap a availability goal across it without looking at those particular opportunities. I mean, be specific as to the subcontracting opportunities within that particular project. And so I don't want you to confuse availability with a particular contract, because they are different. But at the end of the day, in your overall construction projects, you should have a range where you are within your statistical findings of utilization between your available pool and your utilization in the contracts. Hopefully that makes sense. If not, you can see me after class, okay? All right, thank you.
Thanks, Don. Don has framed the manner in which the work has been done, and it'll give you an appreciation for the recommendations as they have been proposed. So in terms of our study period, it's important to be mindful of the time period in which this study was conducted, so that we collected prime contract award and payment data for contracts awarded as of January 1, 2012, and the last of the contracts that were included in the data were contracts awarded as of December 31, 2015. So that's the time frame that we're studying. And he's noted that we are analyzing 3 industries, which effectively covers all of the city's contracts. So we have professional construction, professional services, and goods and services. And goods and services distinguish from professional services because it has different license requirements, but things like landscaping, technical assistance and training that do not require a licensing, but it does follow the city's definition of these industries. In order to do our work, we needed to have data, and our data was collected for 2 types of contracts. One, for the professionals, for the prime contracts that have required to be solicited through advertisement, and for subcontracts, those decisions that the prime contractor made in determining who would help in performing the work that was set forth in the scope that is covered in the contract. So for the prime contract records that was provided to us by the city, the Office of the Auditor provided us the prime contract award information and the payment information. And then the subcontracts, some of those city had, and those were provided to us. But for the most part, the data for the subcontracts had to be compiled from city records, from project files, from prime contractors. It is customarily the case, and perhaps uniformly the case across the country, that governments do not collect all subcontractors. If they have a small business program, they tend to collect those. If they have a minority or women business program, they tend to collect that. But in terms of the universe of all subcontracts, that's something that must be reconstructed. And that we did for this contract. And the second prong of the disparity analysis, other than first being the utilization, the second prong is to determine who's available. And so we enumerated businesses in the market area that were ready and willing to perform the city's contracts. And that began with the successful companies. They obviously were interested and successfully secured a contract. And then we also looked at bidders who did not have that success, but nevertheless expressed that interest and took the time to prepare their response. And then from there, we moved to looking at certification lists, again, trying to find local businesses, small businesses, veteran-owned businesses, women, and people of color. And advocacy groups listings, we secured those from associations. And chamber membership, both metropolitan chamber, ethnic chambers, gender chambers, a full array of sources were used, and our community meetings, which were also well attended, expressing again the commitment of the business community to inclusion and diversity, that those, the outreach effort there, both the persons who attended, those who registered but didn't attend, they all got included and thus enumerated in our pool of willing businesses. This contract has been ongoing for a while, and expressed by the conscientious effort on the part of the city to ensure that all of the data that was awarded during that time period to a prime contractor was considered in the data analysis. And so we began back in June 2017, and once we received the prime contract records from the Office of the City Auditor, we began to analyze that, and with the assistance of the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, we prepared our classifications by industry. That was submitted to the city. The city approved that, and then we proceeded to do our work. And then subsequent to that, the determination was made that there may be contracts that did not get included in the data provided by the Office of the City Auditor. And so we worked with the departments for several months in their effort to try to identify what they thought might be missing contracts. And so some federal contracts were indeed identified, they got added, and so the overall change in the numbers was less than 0.5%, but it did afford every unit of government to have its input in ensuring that there was complete data in the analysis. And so from that, we have in the last 60 days completed a draft and final report, and we're here today. So thank you. So what do we want to know about the market area? And the market area, the court was not very definitive in terms of a market area, other than, as noted with the reference to the City of Richmond's ALUT, the market area cannot expand beyond where the city spends its money. But it can be the jurisdictional boundaries of the city, it can be the county, it can actually be the region, but it cannot include areas where there's not infusion of dollars. And so to be able to have an analysis, it was necessary to determine first where the city was spending its money. So we did something that they call a cluster analysis, where we took the dollars and identified every city that received one or more, where a business domiciled in that city received one or more contracts, and we began to sort in order. And so what we finally in the analysis derived is that roughly 75% of all of the dollars were spent in Franklin County. So Franklin County is our market area. It's within Franklin County that we sought to identify and enumerate businesses willing and able to do the city's contracting. So we have prime contract utilization and the number of contracts and the number of dollars that was spent in each of those industries. And so from that analysis, in addition to the analysis of simply enumerating the number of contracts, the number of dollars by industry, we also then looked at the number of businesses within each of those industries and within the marketplace. So you can see here the percentages of the businesses in each of those industries that are domiciled in Franklin County. And keep in mind, this is not an analysis of the population of Franklin County. It's an analysis of businesses and businesses that want to do government work. And for those of you who only do government work and wish you could do private work, there are businesses who only do private work. So something to strive for. So let's look then at the construction contracts, because as noted, we did separate the contracts into the three industries. So for the construction contracts, prime contracts, because I'll distinguish between construction prime for formal contracts, construction prime for informal, and construction subcontracts. So we'll look at each of those separately. But for the moment, looking at overall all of the construction dollars, this presents to you the total per spend with each ethnic group for construction contracts. And because of the concern about capacity, and there are clearly a number of cases that have made their way to the Federal Circuit Court in which there's been a challenge to a program asserting that the businesses available could not provide and perform the agency's contracts. And in light of that concern, we wanted to be assured that our analysis did not include what is otherwise known as outliers, those very large contracts that can only be performed by a select small group of companies. So we are looking at what is roughly 75% of the contract spend in these range from 100,000, which is the formal level, to 1.5 million. So within that sphere, our analysis shows you here the contract dollars that were actually received versus the contract dollars that were expected based on each group's percent of the total population of available businesses. So it's red for actual, blue for expected. And that you can note in each of these bar charts, in this particular chart, that each of the ethnic groups and Caucasian females receive fewer dollars than expected based on their availability. And therefore, somebody got more dollars than expected, as reflected in the non-minority males. These are for prime contracts over 100,000 up to and including 1.5 million. Notable also, when you look at informal contracts that do not have to be advertised, where the selection is made other than through competitive solicitation, you still have a comparable pattern. So the issue of capacity melts away when you take into consideration even informal, not competitive, selection made by those persons who are in control of that particular contract, you still have a comparable pattern. So moving from construction to professional services, again, you can see the total dollars that were awarded in each of the industries, each ethnic group within the industry, within professional services. And then here, when we looked at outliers, the larger contracts, they were over $420,000. Roughly 25% of the contracts were over $420,000. So we established a cap on the size of the contracts that were advertised. And again, you see a pattern of the expected based on the percent that the group represented in the total population of available businesses and the percent of the contracts that they received. In this particular industry, the threshold for advertising is greater than 50,000. 50,000, greater than 50,000, the city is obligated under its procurement policy to advertise the contracts. So here, we're looking at those contracts where advertisement's not required, and the pattern is the same. So if you move to goods and services, which is the third industry that we analyze, again, you can get an overall view of the awards by ethnic group and gender. In this case, we have not broken out the gender of each of the ethnic groups, but you'll note in the report they are broken out, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But this is just to combine the two, female and males in each industry, with the exception of Caucasians, where females are separated out because they participate in this study, although, as Don has noted, the court did not raise the standard for females of any gender to strict scrutiny. So it's intermediate scrutiny, which simply means that they need to be underutilized in order to be able to participate in a remedy where gender is a consideration. So you have, this is your overall picture. And again, when we use our total dollars, over 20, under 20 for goods and services is informal, does not require advertising. So 20 to 180,000, again, with the outliers being removed, you have a very similar pattern. And you have one group that's almost at parity, but the pattern is essentially the same. And then when you go under 20,000, you have the same pattern. So we looked at construction, and this construction was reconstructed, but we're very comfortable with what we were able to reconstruct. It's very difficult when you're doing a reconstruction, unless you have prior plans, you don't know what the real thing was. If you're reconstructing a building and you have some pictures, you know what it should be. So in the reconstruction of subcontracting in this work, you don't really know what 100% is, but you have to try to get as much as you can from the process that's available to you. And so we're comfortable that while we know we didn't reconstruct 100% subcontracts on 100% of the contracts, we're comfortable that we have gotten a pool of subcontracts that is defensible, if you will. So the key findings on construction subcontracts, pattern looks a bit like it did on prime contracts. And when we look specifically at the contracts, and again, here we're looking at subcontracts on all prime contracts that we could reconstruct. So we don't have dollar levels. The prime contractor gets to make the decision as to whether or not they will subcontract and with whom they will subcontract, and whether that contractor that gets selected to be a subcontractor gets to work or not. And then maybe whether they get paid or not. So all of those are in the discretion of the prime contractor. So here again, you see a pattern of this dollars on subcontracts. You do have several of the groups that did have more subcontracts than they were available. And where they're overutilized, you will find that there is not a disparity, because overutilization does not provide for that. And so here are the professional services, and we looked at subcontracting only in two industries. We looked at it in construction and professional services. We did not do it in goods and services because the nature of that business is such that it's very difficult to determine who provided the box that Dell used to box and ship its computer. So subcontracting in that arena is just not easy to discern or to measure. So we measured it in goods and services and professional services. And so here you have your display of subcontracting. And then when we look specifically at it, again, you see a pattern. You do see more groups have exceeded their availability than on the prime contract level. So what does all of that mean? That means that some groups have a statistically significant underutilization, some are at parity, some are near parity, and some are overutilized. And the court says you have to not only be underutilized, but that underutilization has to be statistically significant. And only then can you be considered for a remedy that is race based in its nature. You can have for women a gender-based remedy if in fact they are underutilized, but they do not have to be underutilized at a statistically significant level. So it's a different standard, as Don has indicated to you. So here we have a report out for the two types of construction contracts, the formal construction contracts and the informal construction contracts. And you have disparity in several places. Some places you have underutilization, and where it's female, if it's underutilized, then that group can participate in the program. And then you have, in the case of Hispanics, there's no disparity, and furthermore, they are overutilized. And so the pattern is consistent across the gender and race. And again, with females, Caucasian females, they are not only do they not have a disparity, but they are overutilized. And as Don said, there's actual case law in which the matter at hand was the inclusion of Caucasian females in the program, and they were overutilized, and the court said that that would not meet the standard. So that's a consideration as you go forward with your program. And so in professional services, you see some of the similar patterns where there's overutilization, in this case, Asian American males at both the formal and informal level are overutilized. And Native American females are also overutilized. So those groups could not be within the program. Goods and services, you can see some similar patterns in groups that have no disparity, which means that they would not participate, and then those with no disparity but also overutilized. In both cases, they would not be eligible for a race-based remedy. So on subcontracting in construction, you see some similar patterns of disparity, and in the case of Asian American females, while no disparity, they are underutilized, thus eligible. Hispanic males are not only have no disparity, but they are overutilized. And then Native American males, not uncommonly, just too few businesses to assess what the use might be, but for the fact that there were so few available firms to measure it. But the Native American females were underutilized. Professional services, you have some similar findings. You have, in the case of African Americans, there was no disparity for males. There was a disparity for females, so females could be in the program where the males could not. And then Asian American males, not only no disparity, but they're overutilized. And so this is indeed a representation of what those findings presented in the analysis that was done on those contracts awarded during the 2012 to 2015 study period. The third prong of a disparity study, there is the utilization, availability, and the anecdotal. And the anecdotal is that portion of a disparity study that provides insight as to what might be occurring in the market area and in the contracting activities of the city. And as Don has indicated, that gives, the court said, some meaning to the numbers. And it is also significant guidance as you're formulating recommendations as to what to suggest to your client. You get lots of insight from the observations and experiences, perceptions as they will be of the business community. And so we were able to discern from the anecdotal interviews, and for those of you who did consent to interview, we appreciate it. There's a lot at risk when you speak from the heart on what your experiences are. And what I found most striking about the anecdotal interview process, it leads most of us who participate in it to feel how helpless you can be when you're trying to do government contracting. And so the fact that you took the time to share with us is greatly appreciated. And from that, we've learned a fair amount about activities, practices, procedures within the city that you feel could be modified and that we agree and have offered in our report to give guidance to the city as it goes forward. And so there is this concern expressed in the anecdotal about difficulty in getting access to contract information. And thus, when you look at the informal findings, the findings for under the 20, under 50, under 100, where contracts do not have to be advertised, and you see disparities, it would suggest that the minority community is not getting access to information, nor are women, to the fact that there are these contracts that they could in fact be participating on, but they only get to participate if they get invited in. If you don't get invited into an informal contract, you will never know that there is an opportunity. And so that, the statistics bore out this observation that we got through the anecdotal. And it gave us reason to look at it more closely because it was commented on in the anecdotal. There also was a comment that ran through the anecdotal that contracts are being bundled. And indeed, we found that there are contracts that get advertised for several years, and that vendor or vendors that get selected, the various departments can buy against that one agreement, be it for professional services, for goods and supplies. And so for several years, there's one or two vendors who get these contracts, and they get to work with many departments. And so if and when that contract is advertised, they have relationships that make it very difficult for you to compete if you are trying to come in as an outsider to compete against someone who's become big brother to a department or a staff. So those were notable factors that are not race-specific, but just institutional in the manner in which the city does its contracting. And the multi-year contracts, again, just help foster relationships, not necessarily intended, but it in fact is the result of a practice. There's also, the city has a pre-qualification requirement. I might note, I have not, in the years I've been doing this work, seen one quite the likes of the city of Columbus, because it requires the prime contractor to be pre-qualified, and it requires subcontractors to be pre-qualified. Prime contractor might be able to track the opportunity that's coming, but the subcontractor doesn't know they're going to get a call from the prime to say, will you be my sub? And if you're not pre-qualified, you cannot. And the pre-qualification application is roughly 30 pages, and it asks for everything but your firstborn. So it is a very difficult standard to meet, but it has come to our attention through the anecdotal comments that we received. And then inadequate lead time to submit a bid. Monitoring excessive and disparate treatment in the monitoring of contracts, the inspector who will come out on the job site if you happen to be a person of color or a woman contractor, and you've set your line and build your trench off of the line. The contractor is apt, the inspector has been reported by businesses to come out, make the observation, go away. Once you put the pipe in and filled it in, they'll then come back and tell you it's off of alignment. An observation made prior to your placing the pipe in the trench and filling the trench, but that, they say, is disparate treatment, and that happens in various aspects of the procurement process and the contracting process. So that is a concern that came forward in the anecdotal information, not to mention reports of excessive monitoring, which costs you money to do things that would otherwise be done differently if there were more camaraderie in the process. Late payments to the prime contractors, and it spills over into the subcontractors, and that minorities and women felt that they were feeling that, having that experience at disproportionate levels. And then the procurement process not standardized, and so from one department, from one time to another, you might have a different interpretation of what is required. So those things came through because there were members of this community that took the time to interview with us and share their observations and the pains that sometimes come from talking about situations over which you had no control and where you believe you should have had control. If you just hold your questions for a second, we'll give you an opportunity to do so. Also, the barriers created by prime contractors, that too was discussed in the process, and that bids were shopped after the prime contract's awarded, so that you get a call from the prime who says, guess what, I've got good news and I've got bad news. The good news is the city awarded us the contract. The bad news is I just need you to give me a better price. And you've given the best price you could and probably undercut what you think was necessary, but you wanted the relationship. And then now you're being asked to lower it, because the implication being if you don't, then he'll find somebody else. And so those have come as experiences. And then the other is you actually get the contract, it's signed an agreement, and then there's a change in scope. Maybe the city has renegotiated the scope with the prime, or maybe the prime has decided it wants to renegotiate with you only at the benefit that would accrue to them. But nevertheless, people did have that experience and they noted it, or they just simply find that they never got used. They go out and see the project that they bid on, that the prime told them they had won, and lo and behold, somebody else is pouring the concrete where you were supposed to be doing that. And no recourse because there are no procedures to protect your interests. And then primes are notorious in floating your dollars and paying you when they seem to be so moved, and to not compensate you for a change order, which they get approved, but you don't get the benefit of that money. So there are numerous issues that came out through the anecdotal interviews, but it afforded us an opportunity to look at the statistics to see if the statistics supported it. And you will find in the report where we could, we actually provided statistical support for some of the comments that we received through the anecdotal comment process. So we have made recommendations, and our recommendations are, some are race-specific and gender-specific, and some are race-neutral. And we are recommending on the prime contracts, where the contracts are bid, as they are often in construction and goods and services, that the city apply a bid discount. So if the prime is in an eligible group, a group that has a statistical disparity, and the bidder that bids, two bidders, one case a non-minority male and a African-American female bid, and there's a bid discount, they both bid $100,000, then the minority female's bid would be lowered by the bid discount. And in the case of them having the same value to the bid, then the lowered contract through the bid discount would be the awarded contract. And so you would apply that similar process in all instances where it is a construction or goods and services bid, if indeed the city takes the recommendation to have a bid discount applied. And on the professional side, when the decisions are made based on an evaluation and evaluation points, we're also proposing that within that 100%, 100 points that will be offered, that a percentage of those points will be assigned to the prime that is in one of the classes where groups that had a disparity. And then on construction and professional services, to set goals where the prime contractor would have to meet the MWBE goal with companies that fit within the groups that had a disparity, or we might call the eligible groups. And there are also a number of race and gender neutral recommendations that we think the city should consider. And one, they need to have a formal written procurement policy and procedures, so as business members, you will know what the rules are as they pertain to the different types of procurement, what the standards are for payment. There are a number of processes that are normally formalized in written document. So we suggest that that be the case in this instance. And also that there's a one-step process to register and to go through the certification process. Too often, there are dual sets of programs, and so if you want to get registered, you have to do one set of papers, and then if you want to be certified as a minority business, a small business, a woman-owned business, you have another set, although they're asking comparable questions. And so we suggest there be one unified process for that, which is going to be more expedient for the city staff, as well clearly for the businesses. And then the insurance bonding is a challenge throughout the nation, and no less a challenge here. And a standard that's being used is the owner-controlled insurance program, where the city would establish with a vendor an insurance program, and if you are successful, then you could get your bonding, your liability insurance through the city-sponsored insurance program, which would equalize things, and a larger, more established business will have no advantage because everyone will be paying the same price for insurance. And it's more profitable for the city because that insurance fee is now controlled by their negotiation with a company that provides the insurance. And then we also are recommending that the policy of bundling many contract opportunities into one and letting the departments all buy from that single vendor, whether it's for goods or professional services, that process be reevaluated and those contracts be issued so that there be more opportunities for more businesses to participate. And also on smaller construction contracts, we are recommending that you follow sort of a national trend of removing the bonding requirements for these smaller contracts and let the city be a participant in the process and encourage and foster the participation of more small businesses in the contracting process. And to pay prime contractors mobilization fees. If you're in the construction business, you have to staff up. You have to acquire certain resources before you can start the job, and you don't get paid until 30, 45 days after you've started the job. So if you pay mobilization, which is fairly common now across the country, you are able to offset that. And then the prime should also pay the sub-mobilization 10 days before they have to start their work, so their costs can also be covered through the contracting. And it's not a unique principle, it's a fairly common practice at this point. And then we need to have a dispute resolution process. There are disputes that the prime has with the city, and there are disputes that the subs have with the prime, and they don't have to be major to be costly. You just need a process where you can have a formal handling of that, and to avoid it being a costly process that can be otherwise problematic for the business, and it can be problematic for the city if things get too far out of hand. And then the program is as good as it's being monitored, and it is useful to you as it's being reported, so you know indeed what progress is being made. And so we believe that awards and payments should be monitored and should be reported out by ethnic group and industry to mirror the classifications that were used in the study. And that way you can see on an ongoing basis whether the correction has been put in place and whether in fact you're moving toward parity for the different industries and for the different groups. And then we strongly believe that the pre-qualification for construction primes and subs should be reevaluated and looked at for the impact that it does have and assessing the need for that process. We also think that the supplier diversity program and equity and inclusion is an important and integral part of any local government. And to have an effective program, you need to have established policies, and you need to have adequate staff who bring the skills to the job necessary to do the job. And so we really think that the office has to be properly staffed, and it should be staffed as you launch the program, not after the program is launched and in operation. It has to go hand in hand with this innovation that is going to happen and that Mrs. Brown will talk about shortly. So we think that that should have policies and procedures which are written, so again, you know what the standards are. And we also think this is an excellent opportunity to introduce technical assistance that goes to take the best of what's out in the marketplace. People have been doing how to bid and how to get certified, but the real question is, how do you work with this city? How do you work with these managers? What do they expect when you are a contractor, be you a prime or a sub? What are all of those provisions? And how do you do it in a timely way? How do you deal with the new digital age? And what assistance can the city bring to you as a business owner, small, large, new, or old, that's going to be in sync with what's necessary for a very profitable business? And the city has a number of partners, all of whom can participate in that process to increase the skill level, because that increases competition. Competition gets a city better price. And most important, that process of engaging all businesses brings more money into the community and increases your tax dollars. So there are reasons for expending resources in developing and implementing a strong technical assistance program. So we think that should occur, and we think that registration and certification should be enhanced. It should be something that you can expect to get a response in a very timely fashion, and it should be done hand in hand so that you're not doing two separate set of applications, because that takes time, and time is money when you are running a business. And we really think the compliance standards need to be enforced. So if you have a program, you say that you have goals set on a contract. At the time of the bid opening, the companies that bid should meet the goals, or they should be found to be non-compliant, non-responsive. It should not be a matter of, with this one we do accept and that one we don't. You have a requirement that there is what they call a good faith, an opportunity to show that it was not possible to meet the goal, and that has a formal set of standards. But if you don't meet that, then you meet the goal or you're non-responsive, so that the program, you know, is going to treat each of the bidders in the same fashion. Consistency is absolutely essential for having a program with integrity. So we think that that is important. Also, joint ventures are another way of increasing capacity. They can be encouraged and they can be supported through the program. And we also think that mentor-protege, mentoring and protege between minorities and women, between minorities and non-minority males. There's a whole variety of ways you can foster these relationships, but I think in a program you want to have them so that you can, again, increase your capacity. And the Business Advisory Council needs to have the teeth to be able to make meaningful recommendations and have those recommendations given serious consideration by the city as it looks at what its next steps should be. And then you have to have adequate staff in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion in order to be able to perform the work. And then you also need to ensure that that office has the clout to effectively carry out the program, because there are difficult decisions that get made once you move to a program where race is a consideration, and the persons in that office need to be able to say this contractor in its bid or proposal met the program goals or it didn't. And that officer needs to carry the clout that will move them to the next responsive bidder. And that's a difficult challenge for a city to make that adjustment, because it means the departments lose some of the authority that they have had. But if you're going to make a meaningful program, and this is a requirement, as is bonding or as is experience, as is technical ability, if those are going to have the same weight as the equity and inclusion. It's going to be a diversity and inclusion. It's going to be important that that office is able to carry that mantle and be able to execute its job in that fashion. And your community is clearly the constituency for that office. So staffing is absolutely critical to the process. And at this point, I take my adieus, and Mrs. Brown is going to talk to you about the next steps, and then we'll open it up for your comments, your recommendations and suggestions. And also, if you have a question or two, we'll take that as well. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Dr. Ramsey. So real quickly, I just wanted to talk through a little bit around next steps to give you some sense for where we're headed and timing. Dr. Ramsey has talked a great deal about some of the work that needs to happen around the program and the impacts to our office. And so we will work very diligently with Mason Tillman moving forward to craft the program that will support these steps moving forward. We are seeking City Council approval by the end of the year on a race-conscious program that will support subcontracting goals related to our projects, as well as some of the other recommendations around bid discounts. Our goal is to go to council by the end of the year. We also, through that process, will be developing the program elements, the accountability measures that will support those efforts, formalizing our program and procedures. We are also ramping up our staffing of the office. We're actually in the process of hiring right now. In addition to that, we are also going out on the street for an RFP for a software management system that will help us to manage the data and our utilization so that we can be more accountable to the community around our utilization and our efforts to achieve parity in this regard. And all of this, while working with Mason Tillman, we will solicit stakeholder input. One of the things that we've talked about throughout this process is that as we begin to move forward, we want to make sure that as we're crafting policy, as we're putting programs in place, that we're doing so with the notion that those who are most impacted by these decisions have some say in how they get implemented. And so we will be soliciting your feedback. We will be working through our advisory council and other partners to ensure that we're responsive to your needs as it relates to the program elements. So the timing again is to have it all completed within the next 6 to 9 months. That includes those program elements. That also includes some of the collaboration and discussions that need to happen internally around our procurement processes and how we begin to standardize those processes and articulate them back to the community, as well as drafting program elements and soliciting your input. Again, we're looking at about a 6 to 9 month time frame, and we really encourage and welcome your feedback and participation throughout that process. With that said, I'm going to stop at this point. I know we're a little bit behind schedule. I'd like to open it up for comment. Both Dr. Ramsey, Mr. O'Bannon, and I will also be available should you have questions. We just ask that if you have a question that you go to the mic. It is being recorded so that we are able to be responsive to your questions. So please, if you have questions, move to the mic.
David Moody, I've got a couple questions and then a comment. I'll make the comment first. I know one of the things you're looking for technology-wise to implement the pay tracking. I would highly recommend you follow what Cuyahoga County does. And what they do there, I get an email every month saying, hey, have you been paid for this project? They show you exactly how much the prime contractor has been paid. They give you a line where you can make a comment to say why you have or haven't been paid. Then they have another line where the prime contractor can't see, but only the people working on the project can see. You can make a comment there if you think something's going on. So in terms of someone to copy or something else, in terms of technology, a system, I'd highly recommend that one. It seems to work pretty well. Question, in the disparity study, you found that for African American and professional services, males in particular, and the graph you showed that there's between the amount of award expected and what was actually awarded, there was quite a disparity. However, for African American males, there wasn't a disparity. Can you explain that a little bit more? Was it more of the situation where African American males for professional services are being utilized, but it's just the female African American women aren't. I just want to understand that a little bit more. Why for that particular category there wasn't a disparity there?
Yeah, because the men were being utilized at a level that exceeded their availability, and the women were, when taking the women out, the women were not being, receiving fewer contracts than available.
Okay. Another question is one of the things the city is changed to, and I don't know how it may have affected the disparity study, but there's a cost plus kind of thing that's going on now where for any contract, you've got your cost and then whatever your multiplier is and whatnot. That also has a big impact if you're a small firm versus large firm in terms of dollars awarded. Is there a way to, level the playing field again? If it costs you $1.50 more than it costs me, then
Right.
I think you should be paid what you need to cover your cost. But how do you make sure that smaller firms or others are able to get an equal amount of dollars available, such that it's not this larger firm, not only can they pay their people more, but they also get an extra 10 or 20%. How do you rectify that?
Yeah, I think the cost plus concept will need to be looked at very closely. I agree, it's beginning to emerge, but what is cost based on and what is the plus based on, and how do you really measure what's really being done? And so I think that's one of the areas that, as you go forward with the program development, to look at whether that is something that is recommended to be continued, and if so, what are the circumstances so that you can take some of the disparate impact from that option. But I think it's a good time because procurement will be looked at as well.
Okay, not to hog all the questions, one more. So the 3 items was mentioned earlier in terms of the thing that the Supreme Court looked at. One of them was the timing in terms of appropriate, making sure that it's periodic. What does that mean? Is it 5 years? Is it 10 years? Is it every 18 months? What is an applicable time frame for, hey, we're going to go through 69 months, you're going to come up with some changes. How long could this program be in effect before you go back and look at it again?
There is no case directly on point that says in this circuit that this is the time frame, i.e. it's 15 years, 10 years, 7 years. We in the industry generally looking at 5 to 7 years for the life of a study.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Moody.
My name is Lonnie Miles. I'm a retired general contractor. My question is this. Did your statistical analysis include the money that the city put into public-private partnerships? And will you be recommending to the city that whatever program it has, whatever programs they come up with, be included in any public-private partnerships?
The answer is no. We didn't look at the public-private partnerships. And the question of whether you can take these findings and apply them is something to be looked at. Certainly to the extent that the primes that the city use are the same primes that the developers are using in their public-private partnership, I think it gives you a way of extending these findings to those contracts. But it wasn't explicitly considered.
Because the city has, nothing moves in this city without the city. And this city spends hundreds of millions on public-private partnerships, which we are excluded from. So to me, it makes sense that the city leverages its power to increase this pie.
Okay. And again, that's where the role of the advisory committee that Mrs. Brown will be working with is so important, because there are things and ideas that may not have been in our scope that are important in order to make this an effective program. So welcome you to provide those suggestions. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Kyo Nkwe with HK Associates. I support what Lanny said in the last statement, and also as a follow-up to David's question. In the case of the African American male professional services, where there's no disparity, is the answer to that because there are few minority male firms being repeatedly used, or is it in terms of the volume, dollar amount that few minority firms are awarded? Because in terms of the finding that there's no disparity, some of us will disagree to that
response. Yeah, The analysis was based on businesses willing and able and the dollars spent with those businesses. And so that's how we have come to that. I might note that these numbers can be reassessed at any point in the process. And while a full study, as Don has indicated, is somewhere 5 to 7 years from now, you'll be getting periodic, perhaps even quarterly reports, which will then indicate whether there's going to be a change in the use pattern based on the introduction of the program. But it is a function of analyzing the available businesses versus the dollars those businesses received. Yes, sir.
Dan Moncrief, McDaniels Construction, also president of the local chapter for the National Association of Minority Contractors, and also national president for the National Association of Minority Contractors.
Well, welcome.
Thank you.
I'll tell Mr. Dones I had an opportunity to hear from you.
Thank you. No offense to my friend, Ms. Watson, in the NAACP, and Ms. Brown, I understand you to say this is going to take 6 to 9 months. But in the extended time of the study this past year, I personally know 2 of my members that have went out of business waiting to get opportunity. There's 5 or 6 more that's on the verge of this business. So I don't think 6 to 9 months is acceptable to save those people that's probably going to be lost. Now, I do agree that we want it done right, Dana. But there are a few things, for a few of the recommendations, that I think that can be done without waiting that time period. One of which, either by executive order or emergency legislation at council, that we can do away with now. One is the pre-qualifications. The other is setting contract specific goals going forth, say at the end of this month. So those kind of things, and I have several more, but I won't give them all to you, but I think time is of the essence, and we can't wait 6 to 9 months.
Hi, I'm Pat McClure with HLH Systems, and my question is about the bid discounting. If you're going to discount, are we going to know what that amount is? And that's one of the things that probably can be done sooner than later also.
Our proposal is the bid discounts would be established in the policy of the Diversity and Inclusion Program, and they would be stated on each solicitation. So you would know at the time that the solicitation was advertised what that bid discount would be.
Andrew Aribo, Rayboy Insurance Group. Who do we direct questions to, and how quickly can they be answered? Questions we have on the disparity study, who do we direct them to?
I think you should direct them to Mrs. Brown. I'm sure somehow it will find its way into my email, but I think if you start with Mrs. Brown, it will make it systematic, and
we
she's
can
in charge.
expect a response within,
I don't know, 7 to 10 days.
all right, thank you.
We'll try to be timely. Thank you very much. Another question, a comment, a recommendation? This is your opportunity to share with us. You coming to the mic, sir? No? Yes? Thank you.
Just trying to find an optimal path without knocking everything over. Not the smallest person in the world. So a couple more things or questions. So what cities, so you've done these disparity studies all over the country, you've done them for a number of years. What kinds of things have you seen that really work such that you're not doing another disparity study in 10 or 15 years? We're not kind of going through this process over again. So like, what are some of the takeaways that, and as you do this in the next 6 to 9 months or whatever period of time, you know, what do you know absolutely works other places? And then what's unique about Columbus that you need to make sure is particularly under consideration from what you studied?
Well, one of the things that I have seen work is when the chief executive officer tells its department managers or department directors what the new position is of that entity and holds them accountable for the program, whatever form it takes when it is approved. I think that that has proven to be very successful. And when the legal department as one of those directors is on board. So when they get a call from a department head that says, I want to do it this way, is it okay? They refer back to the manual, in this case, the Diversity and Inclusion Manual. If you can get that kind of adherence to a program once it's drafted, I think you'll find that you get the most significant change in the performance. But you can't do it one contract and then shift another. You really have to, and that is a sea change to do things consistently and not let relationships and judgment enter into the decision-making process.
So you kind of touched on accountability, essentially, is one of the things that's important. So the only way you see the accountability works is it's just done at senior leadership. There's nothing, from a legal or other perspective to make sure that, you do this. If you don't do these things, there are repercussions to the those who are making these decisions.
Well, I think that's where senior leadership comes into play. It establishes that standard, and it holds people. And it has been my experience that department heads and directors will comply if that's what they're told is the way business is going to be done in an entity.
And then getting back to the first question a little bit, was there any particular city that you'd say that's one that you're going to be kind of looking at as a model, like how they do things there? That's what we're going to really be looking at. Is there any one particular comes to mind?
Well, Cincinnati has been quite progressive within your state. I'm familiar with their work. St. Louis, city of St. Louis, I think also has a very aggressive program. And the city of New York has also a very aggressive program. And it's a program that works across the organization, and they do very specific reporting. So you, as a community member, a constituent, you can actually see who's getting what contracts and who's being paid. All of those things are reported out because they have a comptroller who's independent from the mayor. And so the comptroller is also trying to run for mayor, so he has to keep his mayor in check. So it has checks and balances that work effectively for the business community. That's not always a structure, but that does, it influences those decisions.
Okay. All right.
Thank you so much, Mr.
Okay.
Moody.
Thank you.
My name is Liban Bull. I have a question for the city of Columbus. We haven't seen the New Americans included in the report, and that's the question that I wanted to ask you.
New American. So his question is about New Americans.
New what?
New Americans.
Again, my name is Liban Bulle. The question that I do have is I've seen the disparity report and I haven't seen the New Americans. New Americans, including the Somali Americans, the Nepali and Bhutanese Americans, and we haven't seen that. Thank you.
A Somali American would fall under persons of African descent and probably more direct than some. So I think that's where any group would fall within that. It's not that you're in America, but the definitions come from the heritage of persons, and that's how it gets defined. Yes, ma'am.
In doing the disparity study, was there any analysis of political contributions and contracts?
No, and interestingly enough, I don't even recall that it came up in the anecdotal, that if it would surface, it would be those assertions. But no, that did not, we did not analyze it, and it didn't emerge in the comments. Any other question, comment, suggestion? One of the things is Mrs. Brown has noted that these proceedings will also inform the process that will involve members of the community through the advisory committee. But if you have another observation, comment, or question, we'd welcome it. If not, Ms. Brown, you want to?
I just want to thank you all for your attendance today. As we move forward, there will be a couple of reach outs from our office to make sure that we're engaging you along the way. From survey tools, where we'll send out a survey just asking for your feedback around things that we are considering, to feedback forms asking you to give us any additional feedback that you might have. All of that to say is that we really encourage you to be a partner with us as we go through this process. As we will move as diligently and as quickly as we possibly can to ensure that we are working toward parity in all of these areas. Thank you again for your time this afternoon, and I look forward to connecting and working with each and every one of you. Thank you.